Good afternoon and welcome to Webinar Wednesday. We're excited to have over 200 registered attendees for today's webinar, which is eligible for 1 CE credit from the ACI. As always, we want to get started by giving one of our attendees an opportunity to win an ICE magazine prize pack for answering this week's trivia question. The question is, which Hall of Fame St. Louis Cardinal pitcher also played for the Harlem Globetrotters? You can answer now using the questions feature on your dashboard. While everyone is answering the question, I want to invite you to join us this week for the MD Expo in Orlando, Florida for 3 days of learning, networking, and the latest advances in technology, products, and services. Registration is open. You can register on site, and you can receive complimentary admission by using a VIP pass, compliments of Webinar Wednesday. You can find this VIP pass in the handout section on your webinar dashboard. It's included in the workbook that we sent out today. Also, you can learn more about the trade show by visiting mdexposhow.com. All right, let's see who this week's winner is. It looks like Donald Armstrong. Congratulations. You were the first to provide the correct answer, which was Bob Gibson. Webinar Wednesday would like to thank our sponsor, Universal Medical. Universal Medical has nurtured a business philosophy founded on offering comprehensive nuclear medicine equipment services at a reduced price. Universal Medical's products and services include new and reconditioned nuclear imaging systems, quality parts, excellent equipment service, training courses for healthcare technology managers, camera system moves, technical and clinical support, flexible financing options, and more. You can learn more about today's sponsor by visiting uni-med.com for more information. Our presenters today are Craig Diener, Senior Product Manager, and Craig Snodgrass, National Service Manager at Universal Medical. Craig, you may begin whenever you are ready.
Thank you, Jamie. Welcome, everyone, to our webinar today on disaster recovery. As we get started today, on today's webinar, I'd like you to consider the following questions. Do you have a disaster recovery plan? And in the event of a disaster, are you confident you can recover quickly and fully to everyday imaging? Have you discussed a plan with other departments such as IT, facilities, and your emergency response team? How quickly can you return to full operation? And what trust will your customers have in your department or your practice if you're down for a few days, weeks, or even months? What would the financial impact be of prolonged downtime? Our intent of this webinar is to make you aware of some of these issues and understand the importance of planning ahead for a catastrophe. There are two main types of disasters to be aware of. The first is environmental or natural disasters. Let's look at some of these. Hurricane season is well underway, and we're seeing how these disasters have disrupted operations in the Gulf region. Forecasters are predicting an especially dangerous hurricane season, which could mean more outages, flooding, and other damage. So if you're in a hurricane region, you need to keep this in mind. Recent storms in the Northeast have caused major outages in parts of New York, New Jersey, and the Mid-Atlantic region. The entire country is susceptible to major storms like these. Tornadoes, blizzards, earthquakes, even wildfires can impact your department. Though they're concentrated to a more localized region, the point is every part of the country is in danger of some type of disaster throughout the year, and you need to be prepared if it hits your area. Even if not impacted directly, adjacent areas can feel the effects as well. Remember, there were 250,000 people displaced by Katrina and evacuated to Houston. So I've asked Craig Snodgrass, our service manager, to share some of our real-life experiences with such disasters. Craig?
Thank you. Let's look at a couple of sites that we were personally involved with who had different types of disasters. The first, and by far the worst that we have been involved with, was a hospital in Joplin, Missouri. In 2011, Joplin experienced a Category 5 tornado that was a mile wide and was on the ground for over 13 miles. The hospital was unfortunately in the middle of that path of destruction. This happened early on a Sunday, and they had very little warning. The hospital had the same things going on that every hospital does: emergency room patients, ICU patients, patients in labor and delivery, even surgeries were in process. They had less than 30 minutes to put their emergency plan into action. The force of the tornado caused massive damage to the hospital. It actually shifted the 8-story building on its foundation. After the storm had passed, power lines were down, and since the generators had been destroyed by the damaging winds, there was no backup power. All the communication inside the facility, as well as all the communication to the surrounding area, was out. Water lines, gas lines, and sewer pipes were damaged. Obviously, the immediate care and safety of both patients and staff was the only concern at that time. But before long, they would begin to assess the damage and work on getting back into the business of being a hospital again. There were 3 nuclear imaging systems in that facility. They were all damaged in one way or another and were not able to be reused. It was actually months later before the building was deemed safe to re-enter and the equipment was allowed to be taken out. In the meantime, the hospital's first step to recovery was to place several modular trailer units in an adjacent parking lot. Within a couple of weeks of the tornado, the nuke med trailer was set in place, and we were able to install a loaner system for them to use. Their second step was to erect a temporary metal mesh-type hospital that was in place for several months as they built an entirely new facility. Once this temporary building was in place, we were able to move the loaned imaging system from the trailer to the temporary building and keep them scanning until the new facility was completed. Although nothing could have prepared them for the damage the facility sustained, had they had off-site storage of patient data, that would have allowed them to maintain all patient records, and they would have had access to those during their steps of recovery. Another site I want to talk about, which also experienced a natural disaster, is Katy, Texas. As you know, their recent disaster was caused by a Category 5 hurricane named Harvey. This particular site is a cardiac clinic housed in a single-floor, ground-level building. The site had more warning for the hurricane than Joplin did for the tornado, and was able to do some preparation for the storm. Their preparation was to shut down the entire system, including the UPS, and completely disconnect any power from it. These were the correct steps, but unfortunately they were not able to salvage the imaging system. The clinic sustained no damage from the hurricane winds. However, the ensuing rain that it dropped on the area caused local flooding and put approximately 8 inches of water inside the building. That flooding lasted for several days, and with the electric turned off to the entire community for safety reasons, the imaging system endured those days of setting not only in 8 inches of water, but it set in an extremely hot and humid environment, which was just as damaging. Once the water receded and we had a chance to evaluate the system, our engineer was on site to assist. With the water damage to the electronic boards inside the UPS, as well as to the electronic boards, power supplies, and drive motors inside the gantry, he worked to ensure no power was reapplied to the system. We immediately removed the system and are currently waiting on the flooring and walls to be repaired so we can install their new system and get them back up and going as soon as possible. The site did make one mistake during their preparation. Due to the lack of desktop space, they chose to keep the processing PC under the desk and out of the way. By failing to move it from the floor to a more elevated position prior to the flooding, the 8 inches of water damaged the PC, including the hard drive, and all the patient data it contained was lost. The one bit of luck the clinic did have was that the last 2 patients scanned before the storm, which had not yet been processed and reviewed by the doctor, were still stored on the acquisition PC and were not damaged. Those 2 patients were able to be retrieved and processed. Just like with the systems in Joplin, off-site data storage would have been best, and all the lost patient data would still be accessible. Craig Diener, would you like to now discuss a couple other types of disasters?
Sure. So in addition to natural disasters, there's a second type of disaster, It's just more of a facility type disaster is how I would classify it. We've had several customers whose sprinklers rained on their systems, pipes that have ruptured in the next room or the room above and flooded the scanning room, and air conditioners that have stopped working, which caused the room temperature to exceed the manufacturer's specification, which in turn caused image problems and major system damage. Hard drive failure is one of the most common disasters in a nuclear medicine department. When your hard drive crashes, you not only lose your patient data, you also lose your camera corrections and calibrations, network configurations, license files, and clinical protocols, to name a few. If this information is not backed up, it could take several days to create these files all over again. By simply backing up your hard drive data on a regular basis, you could avoid this downtime and loss of revenue. So let's take a look at a few more examples.
The first example of a facility disaster we have had experience with happened to our customer in Poto, Oklahoma. The hospital was nearing the end of a lengthy remodeling project that had required the move of the nuclear imaging system from one portion of the facility to another. During our site inspection prior to the move, we had pointed out that the HVAC unit in the new area actually controlled the temperature for several rooms in that hallway and was not adequate to maintain a constant cool environment for the imaging system during the hot Oklahoma summers. Since this remodel was taking place in the winter months, while the outside temperatures were cool, they decided to go ahead and complete the relocation of the camera, and they would upgrade the cooling system in February before the summer heat arrived. Their plan was to place an AC unit on the roof directly over the imaging room so it would be able to maintain the room temperature as desired. What they didn't plan for was the delay in the delivery of the new HVAC unit. After the roof was prepped for its installation and the hole for the new ventilation duct had already been cut. At that point, the construction crew decided that they would cover the opening with plywood and glue it down until the unit arrived and could be set in place. Over the next few days, they received a few inches of snow, which would melt during the day when the temperatures would rise above freezing, and then refreeze at night when the temperatures would begin to drop. This continuous fluctuation caused the plywood to become unglued from the roof. That weekend, the in-house engineer got a frantic call in the middle of the night from the nuclear department stating that there was water running down into the system. He moved the system away from the water leak as best he could and then powered it down. The following week, we were informed of the incident and immediately sent an engineer to investigate the amount of damage the water had caused. What we found was that the system had been oriented in such a way that the water had run directly into both detectors of their system and completely ruined them. The acquisition and processing computers were not damaged, so the patient data was still available. We were able to give the customer a couple of options regarding replacement of the system, and a new one was still involved, or was soon installed. We did, of course, wait until the hole was covered by the new HVAC unit. There is not a lot that customer could have done differently. The only thing I would suggest is to be aware of the environment in the facility and even items outside of the nuclear room. This site's damage was due to the snow accumulation and temperature fluctuation, but similar damage has occurred due to water and sprinkler pipe breakage. The last of the customer facility disasters I want to discuss occurred in a single-level facility in Alabama. This customer locked their doors to their dry office on Friday evening and unlocked the doors to a very wet facility on Monday morning. Over the weekend, the water heater had sprung a leak and continued to run water the entire time until they arrived to turn it off on Monday. Most of the building had standing water of up to 1 inch, including the nuclear imaging room. This particular site has a Philips Vertex system. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Vertex, it is installed on a self-leveling epoxy pad that is generally 1/4 to 1.5 inches thick. Due to this slight lift in the height of the system, only the translate wheels, the rails they run on, and the base, the head and foot end stands were affected by the water. As for the facility itself, most of the floor covering had to be replaced, along with a large portion of the drywall. Our assistance with this damage repair was to first mount the gantry of the system onto the rigging and wheels and remove it from the pad. Once the flooring and drywall repairs had been completed, we then poured a new epoxy pad, replaced the rails, and reinstalled the system. This took place about 5 years ago. Since that time, we have kept a close eye on the system for any residual effects of the water. We have noticed some increasing rust on the metal inside the end stands and believe it may have also led to some premature bearing and bushing failures that have been experienced at the site. Due to the short time the camera was exposed to the moisture, the issues it caused have been minimal. One other thing I want to discuss that occurred during the facility repairs, and it is something that we have run into several times over the years during facility remodeling projects across the country, is the drywall work that was completed. The dust that occurs as the drywall is cut, hung, taped, and sanded can be extremely damaging to the imaging systems if they are not shut down and covered to avoid exposure to it. When not shut down and covered during the construction, the dust is sucked into the systems by the cooling fans. This not only causes the filters to become clogged, leading to elevated system temperatures, which can damage the internal electronics, but it also allows the dust, which is rather gritty, kind of like a fine sand, to enter the motors, bearings, and bushings of the motions, causing premature failure of the moving parts. Please note that this is a two-part step. They are shut down and cover. Failure to shut down your system before covering it for any length of time will guarantee system damage due to the elevated temperatures inside the camera without the adequate airflow for cooling.
Let's talk a little bit about planning for your disaster. With some disasters, you may get a little warning, but more often than not, the warning period is going to be short. So it's important to have a plan in place before disaster strikes. Break your plan down to address your imaging equipment, the facility, and the operations. Consider the importance of your system, the software, and as I have stressed in previous webinars, a good functional UPS. Work with your facilities manager and create an emergency plan for fire and water, such as a sprinkler system or a pipe rupture. Determine if the facility is on an emergency generator system. Locate the building drawings and get familiar with the structure of your building, including placement of the floor joists, floor loading, room dimensions, and the electrical outlets. This is important information to have in case you must replace your camera after a disaster. Meet with the operations team or management to find out if your camera is insured along with the rest of your operation. When you purchase and insure your house, for example, you insure the contents as well. So why wouldn't you do the same with your nuclear medicine practice when you pay 6 to 7 figures for such a camera? It just makes sense. But there are some customers that do not insure their cameras, believe it or not. So consider what type of camera you have and what you would replace it with. Insurance may cover the loss of the camera, but you may need to add a little more money to replace it with a newer type camera. And finally, protect your patient data by working with your IT department to back up the information and recover after a loss. There are regulations on patient data storage and retention, so be sure to research HIPAA compliance. Even without the threat of a disaster, you should be very familiar with your equipment. You should have the service records on hand and updated. The system should perform as intended, so the use of daily QA is very important. Again, work with your facilities department to ensure the HVAC system is operating properly. Make sure your power and power conditioning also works properly. And if there's any question about the operation of the HVAC and power during your off hours, you might consider a monitoring device that will record the activity over a 24-hour period. This will tell you if there's any interruptions or malfunctions throughout the night when no one is in the department. Keep in mind the region you're in, the time of the year, and the type of disaster that could impact your practice. As I mentioned earlier, no region of the country is exempt from the potential of a natural disaster. It's important to have emergency response processes for your department. preferably in writing so that everyone in your department has access to them and can get familiar with them. Create a regular backup routine for patient data. In the event of a disaster, you want to be able to access your patient data without having to recreate or reprocess studies. Keep the patient data off-site, on a PACS, or somewhere beside your department. Know where your software CDs are located. Again, this can be off-site or sometimes locked in a cabinet in the biomed department or even somewhere in the scanning room. Know how to power down your system. In most cases, home position is best for powering down. However, as in the case of flooding, it may be better to raise the detectors as high as possible to reduce the risk of water damage. Many times, workstations, UPSs, and patient monitors are located on the floor. Moving these devices to a countertop can save them from water damage and costly replacement, as well as hours of patient recovery. Likewise, if you're in an earthquake zone, make sure these devices are properly secured to the floor or a solid surface. Once you have a plan in place, take the time to have practice drills and audits on a regular basis so that your process will become automatic and not reactive. As I mentioned in previous slide, make sure you have drawings of your facility and monitor the conditions of the environment. Establish a point of contact for keeping up to date with the weather. And make sure your equipment is protected in the event that disaster strikes off hours. Again, good planning and emergency procedures will ensure the safety of the equipment. And finally, be aware of residual problems such as flooding, power grid, transportation, and staffing. Once the disaster hits and you're able to return to your facility, it's important to contact your service provider to assess the equipment. Do not power up any equipment until the service provider arrives. This could cause more damage to the system. Once your service person deems it safe to power up, he can help you test the system for operation and lay out a plan for repair or replacement of the system. Just because the system powers up and appears to be functioning properly does not mean it'll continue to be reliable. Systems that have been exposed to water or major power surges will encounter intermittent problems. These can take weeks and months to troubleshoot, so be patient with your service tech if you do not replace the system after a disaster. Remember, these disasters will probably void your warranty or your service contract. If the camera is beyond point of repair, a new or reconditioned camera may be required. Again, check with your insurance company to see if your camera is covered under an insurance plan of some sort. Also, check if insurance will cover the cost of a rental system until a new camera can be provided. Many vendors have a system on hand that can be utilized as a loaner system until a replacement or a repair is completed. Be sure to ask about this solution. Another possibility is to secure a short-term mobile rental until the room and the camera are ready. Your facilities manager should help you assess the damage to the room to determine structural, electrical, and HVAC damage. The facilities manager or contractor should help you lay out a plan to make the appropriate room repairs and provide a timeline to return to operation. The service vendor can then make appropriate plans to repair or replace the camera in conjunction with this timeline. If the time frame is not feasible, check if a temporary location can be secured to allow for minimal downtime. So after the room renovations have been completed or a new room is secured, it's time to bring in your repaired or replacement camera. Your service provider and contractor should be on hand to do all the checks prior to the power up. They will inspect the room to ensure all structural damage was properly repaired, HVAC system performs to camera manufacturer's specifications, and electrical outlets are compatible with the camera. Once installed, he will power up the system and perform all the quality checks necessary for your clinical acceptance. Prior to the equipment delivery, you should do a walkthrough with the facilities manager to ensure all electrical connections and the HVAC unit are tested and operational. Inspect the construction and make sure you're satisfied with the quality of work. If something is not to your liking or if rework is needed, this is the time to have it done. Because once the camera is installed, it's difficult to work around, and as Craig pointed out, creates an unfriendly environment for the camera. So make sure everything is right before you do your final acceptance of the facility and the camera. I think I got ahead there. Okay. Now that you've been through a disaster, you can use this experience to improve your disaster emergency plan. You should now understand the importance of regular backup of patient and camera data, have a better understanding of weaknesses in equipment, room, facility, and outside services, an improved working relationship with your vendors, your facility managers, and your civil service personnel. Choosing the right service vendor is important. Some advantages to having a good service provider are the equipment rentals that can be fixed or replaced at no cost to you. The rental option is a no-obligation alternative to ownership that's been gaining acceptance throughout the industry recently. A healthy relationship with a company that knows your camera and are experts with equipment and are familiar with recovering from disasters. They can provide no-cost equipment evaluations and no-cost service and planning advice. And they are sure to stock the parts needed for your equipment. So with a comprehensive plan that addresses equipment, facilities, operations, and partners you can count on, disaster recovery can be kept to a minimal amount of downtime, cost, and stress to your department. So with that, I'd like to open it up to any questions that you might have.
Perfect. We did get a few questions during the presentation. I do want to remind attendees that you can still ask your question for this live Q&A anytime by using the question feature on your webinar dashboard. But Craig, I am going to pose these questions to each of you. Please feel welcome to speak up, whomever would like to answer. We'll see how many we can get through today, but the first one is, our biggest issue is overnight power failures. We arrive in the morning and the camera is running or appears to be. How do we know if there's been a power blip or outage overnight?
This is Craig Snodgrass. I'll answer that. If you've come in the morning and your system seems to be running right, then it kind of sounds like maybe your UPS has done what it was supposed to. If it's acting like it should, you really shouldn't know that there was just a blip. Now, if there had actually been a full outage and the UPS batteries had time to drain completely down, then that's when you would notice it, because your system should be off at that point. Let me point out that there's a couple different types of UPSs out there. Some are basically, that's all they are, just a UPS, just a battery backup. And depending on what all you have plugged into them, you know, whether you have your system plus maybe some PCs, some monitors, printers, a gate, maybe even a lamp on the desk, that's going to make a difference as to how long that the battery backup will last and hold your system up. Generally, if a system stays up about 20 or 30 minutes after the power has gone out, that's within reason. Your service provider should be doing a check anytime they do a PM. They should be coming in and taking your system down to the OK prompt where it is just ready to be turned off. And at that point, they can unplug the UPS from the wall. Now, they're not going to stay there for 20 or 30 minutes and see how long it lasts. But if they give it 3 to 5 minutes to make sure that it does hold it up for a little while, that's usually within spec, and plug it in. A lot of UPSs will have some sort of monitoring system to let you know that it is time to replace the batteries, and keeping the batteries fresh is very important. And let me point out that, I say they have about 20 or 30 minutes. UPSs are not designed for you to scan with once the power goes out. Their design is just to give you time to finish that scan that you were in the middle of, and to then still leave you enough time to do the proper shutdown and get them in the off position before the batteries do expire. Again, there are a couple different types of UPSs out there. Some of them have what's called line conditioning. The ones that don't have that, they basically take the power that's coming from the wall, feed it directly through into your system. The ones with line conditioning actually take that power from the wall, condition it, clean it up a little, and then feed it to the system. Those are a lot better UPSs. They do usually cost a little more, but they do keep a nice steady current and solid power going to your system. If you do arrive and your system is on, but you think there's been a power outage, the first thing you should do of a morning anyway is your daily QC. And if that is what you're doing, make sure your numbers look good, and if so, you should be okay to scan. There shouldn't be an issue. Hopefully that answered the question.
Well, if I could add something to that as well, there are companies that do offer power monitoring. So if you suspect overnight that your power is shutting off and turning back on again, they can actually put a device on there that will record every minute of the night, every minute of the day. And if something happened, like I said, if it's a malfunction or an interruption of some sort, if there's a spike, it will record that. And that's a good thing to do if you do suspect there is an issue like that.
Great. Next question. After a power failure, is there a specific method for restarting the camera?
I'll go ahead and take this one as well. Yeah, I'm sure there is. Most of the systems out there do have a specific sequence for powering them up. For instance, a Forte power pack has 3 switches on the side that need to be turned on one at a time and in a specific order. Some systems need the gantry to be powered up even before you turn the PC on. So knowing your specific system and what that sequence is to bring your system up is very important. If you do have any doubt about it, always call your service provider and have them walk you through the proper sequence to bring it up. I'm sure they'd be happy to do that. And if you're ever preparing for a storm or an outage or anything and you need to shut the system down and you're not for sure of what that sequence is, be sure to call your provider too. They would be more than happy to walk you through that process.
Great. Next attendee question. This attendee asked, if I needed a replacement camera quickly, just how fast could you be here?
Oh, this is Craig Diener. I'll answer that. Couple things about that. How fast could we be there? Physically, we could have somebody there within 24 hours. But how fast can we have a replacement camera on site? A little bit different story. That's going to depend mostly on your facility. If you have a facility, if there's minor damage that you think you can get fixed within a week or so, we will do whatever it takes to help you get some type of a system in there in a short period of time, a week or 2 weeks or whatever. It may be a temporary system, a loaner type system. And then at some point in time, if you needed a fully refurbished or a new system, we could then come in with that system and pull the loaner system out. So relatively quick response, I would say.
Next question is, how do we know the camera isn't worth repairing after a disaster?
Well, and that's a very good question. Again, the first thing you want to do is call your service vendor and have them come in and assess it. They are really the experts, and they are also the eyes and ears for not only for you, but for their home office as well. They can kind of assess it, turn in a report, and then we can determine from there if the camera is totaled or if the camera can be repaired or if a replacement is needed.
To kind of add to that, moisture is really damaging to these systems, and we've had some instances where, like I mentioned in our little presentation about water in the facility, or even just in a hot, humid environment where air conditioning was out for a while and moisture is very prevalent. That can really damage the systems, the bearings, the bushings, especially if they're not greased properly to start with. And even just the overall metal in the system can get some rust accumulation from being in environments such as that. So anything where the weather, and you have water, can do some damage. And a lot of that may not be prevalent immediately. It may take time, months, even a year or so, before some of that can build up and actually cause some issues.
Yes, to further go on about that, as time goes on, oxidation will increase and cause even more problems, and I guess you would call it flaky problems. So water damage is probably one of the worst things that can happen to one of your nuclear system.
All right, this attendee would like to know, I do not have a facilities manager. Who do I contact to check my site?
Well, your best bet would first be to call your service provider and have them check out the system itself. As far as checking the site, if you don't have a facilities manager, one of the things that we've run into before at a facility that had some water damage was they didn't replace their drywall. So I know that the system was repaired, they were back up and running. A few months later, they had mold build up in their walls. So they had to go back through, shut down the area, remove the drywall, and then do some facility repair at that point. So I know we're talking about your systems, but not only that, if you do have some sort of a disaster like that, you need to make sure that the whole facility is checked out for whatever the damage may have been. But as far as the system itself, your current provider would be best. They're going to have a pretty good idea of how your system was operating before and know the OEM standards that it should have to get it back up and going for you as needed.
But as far as the facility itself, if you have a landlord, and again, I'm thinking more in terms of like if you own a clinic and you have a camera in a clinic, not necessarily a hospital. So if you have a landlord that you can contact or somebody who is in charge of the building itself, that would be the person you would want to get in touch with. And they can help from that point on if they need to hire a contractor or if they have somebody on staff who can take care of those repairs. But yes, if you don't have a facilities manager, check and see who is in charge of the building itself.
Wonderful. I have a few more questions for us to get through today. We do not have the luxury of a PACS system or any other additional patient storage device. What alternatives are there for patient archiving?
Okay, and again, I mean, if you're working outside of a hospital setting, for example, you'll probably see more of this in a clinical setting. And if you can't afford a big, expensive PACS system, I mean, there are alternatives. We've had customers who, if their workstation is compatible with an external hard drive, for example, they can back up their patients on an external hard drive and put it in a safe place off-site, and then get another external hard drive and just switch the two back and forth all the time. That's one alternative. A lot of vendors who provide workstations, they can also provide cloud storage. That's another alternative. It can be quite pricey as well, but that is one alternative. So, again, check with your your factory or your sales representative and see what alternatives there are for any type of patient storage.
Another question is, where can I find the environmental requirements for my system?
Okay, you should be able to find that either in the service manual or the installation manual, depending on the system that you have. Now, if you do not have either of those on site, you'll have to talk to your service provider, and they should be able to get that information. If they don't have it handy, they can call their home office, and that's information that's easily obtainable.
I'm afraid we have lost some of the CDs for software we have on our system. How can I tell what CDs I need and don't have? And then how can I get copies of the ones I don't have?
The best bet for that would be the next time that your service provider is on site, have him take a look at your system and see what software is loaded on it, and then take a look at the CDs and any other software that you may have on site. He would be able to tell you what is there and what is not there as to what's on your system. And if you are in need of some at that point after he takes a look at it, if your provider is the OEM, they should be able to provide them for you or at least point you in the right direction to be able to get them. If they're not an OEM service, but more of a third party, they too should be able to at least let you know what is there, is not there, what you need, and should be able to point you in the right direction and to get you started down the path of recovering the CDs or any other software that you don't have and may need in the future.
I like this question. It's kind of taken us back to parts of the presentation. In the examples that you gave, can you tell us how quickly the facilities were back to being fully operational?
Well, as far as the ones that we discussed, the one in Joplin, which was a major hurricane, that was that was a major tornado, not a hurricane. That was a couple of weeks before they were able to provide a building, because their whole hospital was destroyed, unusable. So they, like I said, they put trailers in the adjacent parking lot, which took them a couple weeks to get everything planned, maybe even up to a month. But we knew in the process, because we were their service provider, and we already had a camera waiting just for them to get a place we could install it, for us to install it. Because I actually believe the day they unhooked the trailer and bolted it down, we were there loading an imaging system into it. And they were up and scanning as quickly as they could get a place to do it. Down in the Houston area with Katie, they're still waiting on some building repairs. They are removing the drywall and all the flooring from their facility. Again, the water wasn't real deep, but as we all know, you put water with drywall and it'll kind of wick, it'll suck itself up in the wall. So they're removing most of their walls to replace them. Now, again, we're waiting with a system, and as soon as they give us the okay to install it, we're going to be down there installing, and we may even have it installed before the rest of the building has the new drywall up and everything, so they can go right into scanning. The other sites, the Poto, Oklahoma, as well as the one in Alabama, were kind of the same thing. As far as having the cameras ready, we have systems here that if they're not ready, it does not take us long to get them ready to go out the door. So honestly, in most of these cases, we were waiting on the building to be remodeled or repaired so that we could immediately install either a loaner or a system that they purchased in place of the damaged one.
And again, like we said in the presentation, keep in mind, there are modular buildings you could put up as a temporary scanning room. You could possibly even get a mobile unit that's a self-contained coach with a camera in it, and that'll serve as a temporary solution if you need it for a month, 2 months. There are companies that provide that service as well.
Great. This question is in preparation of weather or storms that we know are coming. What options do I have if I want to relocate my camera in advance of a storm?
Well, we do system relocation. There's a little bit of preparation there. So I don't know, we have to know where the system's going, where it's coming from, make sure that the facility we're going into, depending on the size of your system, and if it's not a single level building, maybe the structure of the building. I know occasionally we have to get engineers involved to make sure that a second story or multiple story level building will handle the weight of the system. You got to make sure the right electric is provided in the room, and you got to make sure that the heating and air conditioning is correct for the facility and the environment outside. So actually moving something just ahead of a disaster of some sort, I'm not sure that's a real feasible plan, because there is more planning that goes into a move than just simply picking it up and moving. Now, the action of doing it, yeah, I mean, we can get a truck there, as fast as we can drive a truck there, get it de-installed and loaded on a truck. But that's not anything you want to do either, is leave a system setting on a truck, because that is an uncontrolled temperature environment. Anything that we move or deinstall or install, we have them on the road in the truck as least amount of possible, the time that they're there, a short amount as possible for that reason. So I don't know that it would really be feasible to move a system directly ahead of a known coming disaster. But if you know a disaster is coming, please do let me know.
I love that. Me too. Guys, thanks so much for a great webinar. I do want to remind all of the attendees that we're going to send out a post-webinar survey. You do need to complete the survey to obtain your certificate to get the 1 CE credit from ACI. I want to make a note that this week, due to the MD Expo, certificates will not be emailed into the first part of next week. Again, certificates for this webinar will not be emailed into the first part of next week due to our MD Expo. But I certainly hope that you'll all join us at the conference. Again, you can get more information at mdexposhow.com. You can learn more about Universal Medical by visiting their website. Again, their URL is uni-med.com. Guys, if you don't see the survey on your screen shortly, please do email us at webinar@mdpublishing.com. We have a webinar Wednesday for the next 6 weeks straight, so do visit our website to register for the upcoming webinars. That URL is onetechnation.com/webinars. Enjoy the rest of your day. I'll see you back here next week.